Hey, I'm Comrade Shane, and welcome to Juche Lessons. In this episode, we will be discussing a stand and attitude towards the world that one should take proceeding from the Juche philosophy. That it is necessary to approach the world proceeding from the interests of humanity. Comrade Kim Jong-il once said, quote, "Taking a human-centered attitude towards the world means approaching the world from the interests of humanity, the master of the world." End quote. To approach the world proceeding from the interest of humanity means to observe and approach the world in the perspective of realizing the people's interests, to consider whether certain things and phenomena is favorable or unfavorable to humanity, and how to turn unfavorables to favorables, or how to further improve what is already favorable. Some people may assume that it is natural that humanity pursues favorables, escaping unfavorables, but this is not always correct. Let us take an example from the history of DPRK. General Secretary Kim Jong-il received a document concerning the building of a new factory near the Hamhung area. He inquired with the officials concerned with choosing a location about a building site. One official started to answer that there was a good place in the upper part of the Songchun River, but Comrade Kim Jong-il stopped him and wondered whether this location would give inconvenience to the life of the people who would have to use water from the river. At first, the official simply said that they could keep the water from being polluted if the refinery system was well built. But Comrade Kim Jong-il was unsatisfied with this response and managed to convince the official to cancel the document, so Kim Jong-il and others could make a further study of the situation. Traveling to the Hamhung area, they inquired with the residents and brought in experts to make a more thorough, concrete survey into the area. As a result of these efforts, it was reported that there would perhaps be no problems after the factory is initially built, but that in the future it could potentially affect the water when the factory expands after some time. Comrade Kim Jong-il thus asked if they would consider selecting a different location for the factory in a less delicate locale, and recommended that instead a new sewage disposal and purification system should be built in place of this original location. Thanks to these efforts, the cleanliness of the Songchun River was ensured for the future. To take another example from the history of DPRK, allow me to read a quote from Comrade Kim Il-sung. Quote, "Once our economic officials suggested that a gold mine be developed on Mount Myeonghang. I did not agree with them, however, as this mountain is the most noted of the 5 beautiful mountains in our country, and the development of a gold mine on it might spoil its beauty. I explained to the officials the need to preserve the beautiful scenery of Mount Myeonghang, even though we might not be able to mine several tons of gold. I told them to make it more pleasant and turn it into a cultural recreation ground for the people." End quote. As we can see from these examples, not everything humanity initially does or wants to do is favorable to themselves, and accordingly, it is important to observe everything and plan in a far-sighted way, putting in the first place the essential demand and interest of a social being to live and develop independently and creatively, free from fetters of nature and social bondage. And this, of course, includes protecting the environment which sustains us. It is necessary to keep it as a top principle to defend the independent rights and interests of humanity in all activities, to keep it as a fundamental purpose to defend our independent rights and interests in all activities of cognition and practice. And since purpose defines the target, task, means, methods of cognition, thus transformation, and decides the result, it is of utmost importance to set up correct goals in a far-sighted way to successfully conduct cognitive and practical activities, again, as my historical examples tell us. Since the activities to cognize and transform nature and society take place against diverse things and phenomena, purpose can and should be different. Ultimately, the fundamental essence, however, should be oriented to defend humanity's independent rights and interests. In other words, all concrete purposes should be set proceeding from the fundamental purpose to defend humanity's independent rights and interests. Purpose itself reflects humanity's demand, interests, the condition of its realization, and the determination to reach the result. Thus, to keep it as the top principle to defend the independent rights and interests of the people also coincides with the intrinsic demand of the masses, from whom arises the purpose of all cognition and practice. So to fail to set it as a purpose to defend the independent rights and interests is against the nature of humanity's cognition and transformation, and become antagonistic to the demands of the masses, and thus creates contradictions which lead to struggle and the rise of social disorder. To approach the world proceeding from the interests of humanity is, secondly, to make all problems arising in cognition and practice be oriented to realizing the people's demand for independence. This means that the process of cognitive and practical activities should contribute to the independent life of the people. For this end, it is very important to define the targets of cognition and practice in combination with the demand for independence. A correct definition of this is a sure guarantee for the successful activities of humanity. Humanity has inexhaustible creative ability to cognize and transform all things and phenomena in the world, and the people in each generation try to understand and transform the world with the demand and creative ability that have been socially and historically defined. People raise independent demand and satisfy it with creative ability, and in this process, we further develop our ability and raise even higher our demand for independence. In order to make all problems arising in cognition and practice serve the realization of people's independent demand, it is also important to select the means and methods for the better realization of our demand for independence. For success in this work, correct means and methods should be applied. Means are things and phenomena used by humanity to attain the purpose, while method is the mode of activities to attain purpose. The purpose defines means and method that, in turn, guarantee the attainment of the purpose. And correctly set goals can be obtained only by corresponding means and methods. Since the purpose of cognitive and practical activities is to defend humanity's interests, the means and method ought to serve defending and realizing our interests as well. Even with the purpose correctly set, If the means and method infringe upon humanity's interests, it cannot score success in cognition and practical activities, and thus will fail to display independence, creativity, and consciousness. In the past, people in some socialist countries felt everything was right after their stomachs were full. They claimed, therefore, that they should develop productive forces by whatever means necessary, while introducing capitalist politics and modes of management. As a result, socialism was undermined and eventually contributed to the tragic overthrow in several countries. This tells us that only when the means and methods of cognitive and practical activities are selected on the principle of defending humanity's interests can the activities be a process of enhancing people's independence, creativity, and consciousness, thus successfully attaining their goal of defending humanity's demand for independence. In order to defend humanity's demand for independence and interests, it is also important to evaluate the result of cognitive and practical activities with the criterion of our demand for independence and interests. Correct evaluation of this is prerequisite for the further development of humanity's activities. The criterion of evaluation is how much they serve the defending of humanity, the masses' demand for independence, and our interests. All things and phenomena in the world have value to humans as long as they serve humanity. Herein lies the reason why the degree of serving humanity's demand for independence and interest becomes the criterion of evaluation. Today, in our capitalist countries, we have the Mammonist value system, which means our society intrinsically values money or gold, even more than people, and we evaluate things with the criterion of money, profits. And this in turn gives rise to social instability and social evils, such as not only objects, but also humans' personal value being converted into mere exchange value. We must in all cases repudiate the inhumane Mammonist viewpoint of the reactionary exploiting and ruling class that demonstrate they only care about money and not the life of the people, humanity, or even the future. We must fight for a society that evaluates everything with humanity's demand for independence and interest as the main criteria. The Juche-oriented standpoint and attitude towards the world, proceeding from the interest of humanity, aims at realizing independence, enabling cognition and transformation to proceed in the correct, progressive direction. That's all for this episode. Check out our Facebook and Twitter pages for more Juche and DPRK content, which I will leave links to in the description of this video. If you enjoyed what you saw, please remember to like, subscribe, and share, so we can raise the revolutionary consciousness of the masses. And because I run solely on your motivation and encouragement. Red salute, Juche comrades!